to remember a tripod.
Come on, Leanne, you later. If you got here on time, you could leave beforehand.
Make
It's
some
kind of a
snow.
long-standing joke with Leanne and I. She's never on time, and I'm always an hour early. And so when she said she was coming, I said leave at 5 o'clock. And she said, oh no, I've got plenty of time. I don't have to leave till 6. I said, Leanne, you're going to be stuck with the traffic. No, I'm not. Ta-da.
Okay, guys, one back in. We want to get going.
Is Dick on this one? Hmm? Oh, that's fine.
Okay, kind of like John, when I started this program, this paper, I had an idea where I wanted to go. As Dr. Burton is famous for telling us, I had way too many microbes on my armrest, and I needed to trim them down. And I trimmed them down, and it was still too big. And I trimmed them down again, and it was still too big. So I just threw that whole thing out the window. Because if you're going to write on medieval women, you're going to be busy for a long time, and it's going to take more than 23 pages. So I decided to write on Hildegard of Bingen. When you go to write on any medieval woman, you have to deal with the fact that a lot of sources are not there, and what sources are there are written by men. And, well, you know, half the population of the world at that time is rarely mentioned, even though they played an important role. They were wives, mothers, peasants, nuns, and artisans. But what we see a lot of is about the men, the kings, the warriors, and the popes. And then along comes Hildegard. She was a composer, a scientist, a theologian, all this in time when women had very little recognition. This is the region where Hildegard was born. She was born in 1098. She's the 10th child, and the 10th child was traditionally the tithe child and given to the church. And at this time, women had very little education. What education they did receive was normally at home, tutored alongside their brothers, until they were sent to the home of another noble to be finished out. They were taught to manage a household. Women were schooled in practical matters, not academic matters. Few did learn to read Latin, but most of those were not able to write it, so they employed scribes. One of the most famous women who could read Latin but could not write it was Eleanor of Aquitaine. Of course, as I mentioned, she was the 10th child, the one traditionally dedicated to the church. She was sent to live and continue her education with Jutta von Spannen, a young woman with a reputation for her own education and piousness. She was also a distant relation of Hildegard. Jutta would take the 8-year-old child with her to a monastery of St. Gisela in Diesenberg, where they would live as anchresses until Jutta's death in 1136. Hildegard was always a sickly child. She would later recount that at an early age, about 3, she started to have severe headaches, and visions would follow. Amazingly, at 5, Hildegard predicted correctly the sex, markings, and colors of a calf several weeks before its birth. She would later write to Bernard of Clairvaux that she, from her earliest childhood, had suffered from anxiety caused by these visions. However, she was comforted by her knowledge that they came from God, and that she had decided to choose God as her parent. In 1112, she took the veil and made her vow as an anchoress. She was 14 years old. Anchoresses, or anchorites, as the males were called, is a person who withdraws from the world to pursue a life as a religious hermit. They are sealed in a small cell attached to a church or an abbey. And this small cell will have an opening about this big, where things can be passed in and out for the necessities of daily life, and where the anchorite or anchoress can hear the goings on Amorites are not a Christian invention. Actually, they're known as set-asides, and they were long recorded by the ancient pagans and Jews. They were normally offerings, and there have been a large number of them found in burial grounds in Scandinavia. So this is something that was prevalent across Europe long before Christianity. These were traditionally offerings. The Jewish have a tradition, and they yielded quite a surprising number of these set-asides, starting with Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac. This is one of the illuminations that is accredited to Hildegard or her nuns and one of her first manuscripts. And this saw vision, and Dr. Bertheim, I have no idea how to say the Latin name of that, so I was going to hope you could give it a stab.
Yes, but you can make a deal. I don't know if they're good or not.
70 songs survive, and this is one of them. And I'm using this kind of canvas. If it plays 4 times, I'm out of time. At Jetta's death, she was elected the prioress and leaves her position in the hermitage. So apparently Hildegard was not as willing to be locked up in there for the rest of her life as Jetta von Spannen was. At age 42 or 43, Hildegard received a command from God telling her to record what she saw and heard in her visions. Hildegard had received messages and visions from God since she was a young child. These visions occurred with what was suspected to be episodes of severe migraines. Her illness followed the typical pattern of cluster migraine attacks, and she would suffer from debilitating illness for the rest of her life. Hildegard was a gifted healer, writing 2 books on folk medicine in the 12th century. She was able to speak and write Latin at a time when most men and women were illiterate. Hildegard would bemoan her lack of formal education for the rest of her life because she was not educated in what they considered a classic education at the time. She did not have a founding in the Greek philosophers and the great works like that. She did have a very good education. Bernard, her superior and one of her earliest allies, was amazed at her intellect and abilities. These 2 are illuminations attributed to Hildegard. Stars is the one that she claims that she saw when she had her first vision, when God spoke to her and told her that she needed to write down what she saw and heard. She left us with 70 poems, over 400 pieces of correspondence, so the most correspondence of any woman in the medieval period. 9 books, 2 of which deal with herbal medicine, and this is the frontispiece of her first book. Hildegard lived until she was 81 years old, which in the medieval time was an astounding life. But late in her life, into her late 70s, she traveled around Germany. And during these travels in Germany, she took on the German Cathars. People willingly came to see this woman, even if she was reprimanding them for something, because they believed that she had a gift from God, and that they believed that God sent her to them. In 2012, 800 years after her death, Hildegard was canonized as a saint. Pope Benedict, in one of his final acts as Pope, was to see this countrywoman named as a saint and a doctor of the church. And the 2 millennium that the Roman Catholic Church has existed, only 35 people have been declared a doctor of the church, and only 4 of them are women. And there's my credits. And I didn't go over my time. I've been practicing this for you before we guys. I will tell you that it is an incredible feat to research a medieval woman because there's so little written about them, and you have to take a lot of what it is written about a man and kind of work it around, because we all know that they existed and that they were active in the world. I mean, they just didn't sit there and crochet blankets for 1,500 years.
You said that in her later life she went and traveled. How hard would that be as someone who was sealed up in a cell for their very early age? What did she have to go through in order to get out again?
In 1136, she was elected prioress of Abbey, and at that time, they, I guess, knocked down the wall and let her out.
Okay, so
Because they had to, when Jutta died, to remove the body. And so I guess, you know, like I said, I don't think she was as willing to spend the rest of her life in an 8 by 10 box, which is generally what they are. I mean, little tiny spots. So.
Okay, so they, by making her prioress, that was a new position, and they removed her from the old one?
I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if that's what released her from her vow to be a hermit or a religious hermit. But it seems that at that point she had enough. And she decided that she would move out into the world. And when she started having her visions and they were affirmed by the Catholic Church, this woman became one of the movers and shakers in the 12th century.
Where is her music archive?
Where's her musical archive?
Where's her archive? How do we know about this body of music?
The Vatican
Ah,
has most of it. And the Vatican archives are going to be digitized over the next few years. And we're hoping that a lot of the things about medieval women and their abilities and the things that they did will start to show up, and we will find out more. There's still a lot of stuff I want to know what's going on down there anyway.
very good. That's